et du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Well, let's get specific about it. A lot of Americans got their checks from the government. They immediately turned around and they paid their rent. They paid part of their mortgage. They depended on that to be able to hold over and be able to keep their family inside their apartment or inside their townhome or inside their single-family home. Now, you're going to have eviction notices going out in Martha McSally's Arizona, and Cory Gardner's Colorado, and Joni Ernst's Iowa, and Susan Collins' Maine, and Tom Tillis's North Carolina, and I could keep going, and Mitch McConnell's Kentucky. And are they really going to be able to explain to their constituents, well, you know what? We didn't pass that to keep you in your apartments or to keep you in your home, your family homes, because Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton and people who want to be president 4 years from now, because they didn't want us to pass it. And we just didn't have the power, the strength to roll them and get it passed. Are they going to really say that? I mean, and also, when people are lined up to vote and they can't vote, or they find out that their ballots, their mail-in ballots, their absentee votes, ballots don't get there in time because Republicans wouldn't pass legislation now in August. I'm warning you again, Republicans, like I started warning you in March. All right, I'm trying to help you here. If there's chaos in November and you say no to giving the post office the money it needs, the funding it needs, to giving states the funding it needs to protect American democracy this fall, it'll be another mark against you. Just like this pandemic. Just like I've been telling you. Just about every single day since March, to make your president take this virus seriously, to stop lying to the American people, to stop being Pollyannish to the American people, to stop making promises that obviously were never going to be fulfilled, to stop saying we're going to be able to open by Easter, we're going to be able to open by Memorial Day. Good Lord, the 4th of July is come and gone. And it's only getting worse. And it's only getting worse because you didn't hold your president to account in March. Americans keep dying because you didn't hold your president to account in March. Hell, you wouldn't even start wearing masks until recently. Some of your governors wouldn't let localities pass mask ordinances. Like, what is that about? Right? You've screwed this up terribly. You're probably going to lose the presidency of the United States Senate and the House. So here's another chance. Here we are in early August, all right? I'm going to try to help you again. I shouldn't. I don't know why I do. You know, people tell me my problem is I care too damn much. Well, I really do. I care too damn much. So here I am again, telling you, do your job. Push the president to be responsible on the pandemic. Push Mitch McConnell to pass economic relief that will help struggling Americans at least get a paycheck, that will keep them in their apartment, that will keep their family in their townhome, that will save their American single-family home for a year. Donald Trump talks about the American, what does he call it? The boogie-oogie American crazy-ass dream or whatever he calls it. Some stupid tweet about the American dream. You know what the American dream is? The American dream is to be able to feel security living in your own home or your own apartment with your family. And that dream is being torn away from so many Americans right now because of the economic fallout of this pandemic, which did not have to be this bad. But since it is this bad because you didn't listen to the warnings from Joe Biden in January, or so many of us starting in March, a lot of people are suffering, and you got to help them now. And yeah, it's going to cost a lot of money. And for a small government conservative, yeah, it makes me flinch. But we have no choice. Just like you have no choice, you have to make sure that American democracy is protected this fall, and make sure that everyone who wants to vote can vote, whether Donald Trump gets reelected or whether Joe Biden gets elected. You have to do that, and it's early August, okay? Don't screw up like you did on the pandemic. Hold the president accountable on the pandemic. Make him get real. Protect Americans who are suffering, who are about to be evicted, okay? That's real to them. They're more than a crosstab in your polls. And finally, make sure every vote is counted. Whether Trump wins, Biden wins, whether McSally wins, Kelly wins, at the end of the day, that's not your job to worry about. Your job is to protect American democracy. And right now, you're not doing it. Right now, you're not protecting American workers. Right now, you're not protecting American lives. When Mitch McConnell comes back, tell him that.
It is Monday, the 3rd of August of 2020, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. Oh, yeah, another one of those weekends. And we have a lot of, what shall we say, tidbits to put together into a fine gourmet meal. Oh, wow. You know, when Trump is not golfing, he's at Walter Reed. And why? Why was he at Walter Reed? Is he just playing around? Is he going for another mulligan? Yeah, well, he had a pretty bad bruise on his hand where they put the IV in. Yeah, that's what they're conjecturing the bruise is from. Of course, he said it was from a golfing accident. Really? What kind of accidents do you have golfing? Especially one where you have a bruise on your hand where an IV would have been stuck in. But, hey, he lies all the time, and he's lying to us now. So, things seem to be getting worse in terms of the direction of the country. And it really shows here on the local level, too. There are a few really toxic types who continue to do the work of Vlad and therefore Trump. Because they're out there pretty much mimicking the talking points. And what are the talking points? Well, in terms of the civil unrest we have right now, it's a Marxist revolution. Like, that's supposed to really cause people in the suburbs to go, oh no, we got to stop all these protests because it's a Marxist revolution. Yeah, they're working for Vlad. I hope they're getting paid. Because if they're not, they're just the same as the useful idiots before them. I mean, come on, show a little bit of gumption, show a little bit of forethought. Come on, I thought you were greedy people, self-centered, self-interested. Think about getting paid for your actions. Jeez. Otherwise, you're just a useful idiot. And I got to tell you, useful idiots are a lot more useful, really, than even the ones that get paid. But, hey, if you're doing the work, do it good, because you're going to be held accountable eventually. All right. Well, I am not looking forward to any kind of post-French Revolution action. I don't want to see that. This is America. All right? We don't take our neighbors and frog march them to the gallows. I know the other side would. In a heartbeat. They don't even have to wait for the revolution. They're going to do it right now. But real Americans. Yeah, I'm calling the other side not real Americans. Because the other side's still fighting for the southern states against the northern war of aggression. Yeah, they would. But we don't. Real Americans don't do that. I've been called a violent terrorist and a violent terrorist sympathizer simply because I am backing Black Lives Matter. Marxist revolution. And we're also violent terrorists for registering people to vote. The wall of moms. Terrorists. Violent terrorists. In spite of what we know. But they just keep putting these memes out there. Like Marxism, once again, is supposed to make us all quiver in our boots. Hey, the 1950s called, and they want their, Marxist fear-mongering back. It might have worked then, but even though I was a small kid, I remember, even in the popular culture, the jokes that were made about all this Bircher conspiracy fear-mongering. They called Eisenhower a commie. Dwight Eisenhower, the guy that won D-Day. Well, he didn't, but you know what I mean. And who would call Eisenhower, the guy who was the supreme commander of the Allied forces against Nazi Germany? Who would call that guy a commie? Yeah, you would think Nazi sympathizers. And now, Black Lives Matter is being called a Marxist revolution, just like they called the right for a black to vote a Marxist revolution. Oh, fair housing? You mean Jews and blacks get to move into our neighborhoods? That's a Marxist revolution. You want to start a union to make sure that you're paid something above, nothing? The Marxist revolution. Oh, you want to make sure that the overdraft fees that you're getting charged, even when you didn't overdraft, are not imposed. That's a Marxist revolution. You want to make sure that CEOs don't raid the coffers of the businesses they're driving into the ground at the expense of the people who put their money in on the good faith of that CEO. You want to hold that CEO accountable? That's a Marxist revolution. You want us to wear seat belts? That's going to really mess up our precious bodily fluids down there, and that is a Marxist revolution. It's idiotic on its face. Real Americans see through it, and if we are allowed to vote, this guy will not be in office. And if we're not allowed to vote, oh man, we see what's going to happen. They have a lot of guns. We don't talk about ours too much because we don't have to. Because, if we own guns, it's not because it's tied to some sort of, feeling of a lack of self-worth. Yeah, we don't own a gun because of that. We don't need to show off our weaponry to make us feel like more than what we are. But they do. Which means, ultimately, they're weak. They don't have the fortitude to be able to continue what they are being told to do. You know, a cult can only program so far, because you have to then rely upon the capacity for being able to fulfill the task. Okay? And we are now seeing what happens when someone not up to the task has been put into a position of power to affect a particular kind of change. And yeah, he has been able to affect some change. And he stumbled and bumbled and bungled his way into doing the task pretty close. But getting caught is not part of the plan. Getting stopped is definitely not part of the plan. They were hoping for sort of a dictator that could make the trains run on time, and this one can't. But when they do find one who can make the trains run on time, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And how do we stop that from happening? Well, I'll tell you. John Lewis said voting is our most powerful tool. It is our weapon. We need to find a way to break through these old boy networks in these old boy southern states, because that's where it's predominant, and get rid of the Mitch McConnells taking Deripaska money. I mean, you know, that ought to be right there an issue. We ought to be screaming it to high heaven. The Deripaska money isn't just for an aluminum plant in Kentucky. And we have to have the fortitude to do something about it, and that means registering people to vote in mass quantities as soon as your ability to vote, whether it be mail-in, absentee, whatever you call that, as soon as that happens, start doing it. I've always been the type that wanted to at least put in my mail-in ballot on the day of the election, because I just was old school. I like the old quaint America where you got to stand in line and talk with your neighbors when you went to vote. I like that. But those votes on election day can be hacked on these hackable voting machines. And you know what cannot be hacked and flipped? Mail-in ballots. That's why this guy is so intent on stopping that, because he knows it's not going to be just 70,000 votes manipulated over 3 states to get an electoral college victory. We're looking at a whole bigger can of worms. They are only able to manipulate, even with the hackable voting machines, they can only do it on the margins, which means when there's hardly anybody voting. When they have massive turnouts, they cannot handle it. And they certainly cannot handle it when it's going to be predominantly mail-in ballots, possibly. Let's get rid of the USPS, even though it's in the Constitution. But hey, the Constitution's just a goddamn piece of parchment. The ink is fading. You can't even read it. If it was something they thought serious, they would have, they would have put it in the cloud. But they didn't. We need to wrest control of our democracy from these proto-fascists, neo-fascists. What are they? They are certainly not representative government. Certainly. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? River City Hash Mondays. Well, of course the GOP needs to hold Trump accountable on election interference and the conscious mistakes on the pandemic and any number of things. But, they won't. They won't. They're Vichy collaborators. On the rest of the menu, states are eager to expand broadband internet into underserved areas, but are wary of the CARES Act deadline. Yeah, well, they should have started sooner, and maybe they need to extend the CARES Act deadline for this particular program. It would be nice. The Navy was reluctant to reinstate former Navy SEAL and Missouri Governor Eric Greitens. You know, that sexual deviant guy? Well, they were reluctant until Vice President Mike Pence's office intervened. And despite not being confirmed by the Senate, Trump's most divisive nominee for a Pentagon position so far has taken a different, less senior policy role at the Defense Department. Can't confirm him. They'll get him in there somehow, some way. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Netanyahu condemned the thousands protesting against him daily, and then criticized the media for encouraging them. Where have I heard that before? And gunmen killed a journalist in the violent southwestern Mexican state of Guerrero, the fourth murder, at least, of a reporter this year. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. And just another reminder, Kelly and Ricky will be at Netroots Nation this year in the virtual world, because we do have a pandemic going on. And you know what that means. Yeah, we have a pandemic going on. But thank you, Kelly and Ricky, for manning the fort. And do stay tuned to Netroots Radio for Netroots Nation updates, interviews, etc. by Kelly and Ricky, and maybe a few others too. Indeed. If you would then take a look to the leftish of our homepage, the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will then notice the link to our Patreon page. And I know this is a broken record to those of you who have been listening for almost 10 years. But to those of you who might have stumbled upon us and find what we do here of some interest and import, because it's not just West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We're talking about the whole station. And if you could afford to send Netroots Radio the cost of an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, we are adept at stretching those dollars and paying our bills, which then allows us to fly under the radar. And when you fly under the radar, oftentimes you're able to continue resisting as the founders originally intended, and that's how we determined that our civic duty will be fulfilled. Not all of our civic duty, but at least that part. And we thank those of you who have been so generous to give us a monthly patronage, and the bills keep increasing. Well, in terms of the amount. You know, you think there was a pandemic going on and they might cut you a break? No, let's raise the monthly bills. Okay, well, if that's the way they're going to play it, we're just going to have to pay it. And we do. So thank you for your generosity indeed. And there's no kidding around on that. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. I, of course, take care of at Justice Putnam on Twitter, and you could follow me there. And why don't you? Because I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that linked up on social media, because that's what you do. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, YouTube, iTunes, iHeart. Did I say that already? iTunes, yeah. Apple Podcasts now, too. Is that iTunes and Apple Podcasts? Is that the same thing? Is that kind of like eBay and Rakuten? Hard to tell. Anyway, pick up podcasts wherever you can find them, because you can find them anywhere. And also, I should remind folks, on Sunday, I do have a broadcast of really what I've been calling pandemic and civil unrest music during this pandemic and civil unrest. But the Justice Department Music Sans Frontières has been running for not quite 10 years, but almost. And why don't you tune in? And if you don't tune in, pick up podcasts. Indeed. And they're on Spreaker and a few other platforms as well. So pick that up. Justice Department Musique Sans Frontières does broadcast on Sundays at 8 p.m. Pacific. And pick out your time in the world, because we actually have quite an extensive worldwide listenership. Yeah, listenership. There you go. All right, let's dive into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Hash Mondays. Wilson Ring of the Associated Press brings us this first offering. Fearful of losing federal pandemic dollars, officials from states across the country are rushing to finish projects by the end of the year aimed at expanding broadband internet into underserved areas. Indeed, because when I moved from, I don't know, it would seem like now in retrospect such an advanced society in the Bay Area. You know, Trump keeps calling the Bay Area and San Francisco in particular some sort of hellhole. Man, talk about advanced society. Then I moved to Oregon. It's like, I don't want to put down third world countries, but it's kind of like being in a third world country. Try to get broadband brought to your house. Yeah, they charge an arm and a leg, and they just don't have it. Try to bring something from the road. I'm not talking about a street. I'm talking about a road to your property. Get some fiber optics buried. Oh, my God. They don't even have the thing to the road out there on the road to be able to tie into the fiber optics. And I got to say, the wireless sucks. It really does. It's a line of sight because we live in a fairly mountainous region here in Oregon. To comply with the current CARES Act rules, states must have the broadband projects, which can typically take months, if not years, of planning and construction, up and running by December 30th. Yeah, that's really positioning them for success. Efforts are underway in Congress to provide greater flexibility in the funding, but you know what Mitch McConnell says. He's the Grim Reaper, and the Senate is the graveyard, especially if a Democrat wants it. In Vermont, the legislature cut back on what lawmakers would have liked to allocate from $100 million to less than $20 million. They didn't believe they could have spent the larger amount on time despite the need. We have to get it out. We have to get people to hook up, said Vermont State Senator Ann Cummings, a Democrat who chairs the Senate Finance Committee, which worked on broadband issues during this year's legislative session. Now, the Vermont Department of Public Service is in the process of issuing requests for proposals to spend $17 million. Potential contractors that usually plan years in advance are having to rearrange their schedules to do the work, said June Tierney, commissioner of the Public Service Department, which expects to issue the first contracts in the coming days. Well, they better hurry up. With broadband, the goal is to expand the service so it would be available to students staying home during the pandemic, people who need to use broadband for telehealth reasons, and people working remotely from home. Yeah, how terrible of us that we would want to bring the rest of the country up into the advanced societies like the Bay Area. The coronavirus funds that the feds are giving to the states can be used for the short term in response to COVID, but broadband expansion is a long-term goal, said Heather Morton, who follows state broadband efforts for the National Conference of State Legislatures. Among the other states that are dealing with the issue are Alabama, Iowa, and New Hampshire. Based on guidance we have received, we are looking at short-term immediate solutions using existing technology to increase internet access. Yeah, well, what if your existing technology is two soup cans and a string? That's broadband. It ain't fiber optic. New Hampshire is planning to spend $50 million to expand broadband into underserved parts of the state. We're moving as fast as we can, regardless, but hopefully they'll give us more time, Republican Governor Chris Sununu said during a recent press conference. The end-of-the-year rules don't just apply to broadband. Housing and many business projects or other sectors that traditionally require long lead times also must be finished by the end of the year because, Trump's such a great businessman. He knows how business works. The Vermont legislature appropriated $32 million of CARES Act money to deal with emergency housing issues, including finding permanent homes for the homeless, considered to be among the most vulnerable populations to COVID-19. The goal of the $2.2 trillion CARES Act, passed by Congress in March, was to help states cope with the coronavirus pandemic quickly. Generally, the money is allowed to be used for outbreak-related expenses, but cannot go to replace tax revenue that has evaporated because of economic shutdowns. Many states have shared portions of the money with local governments that didn't qualify on their own. They're also launching loans and grants for businesses and housing and utility assistance for individuals, along with using it to pay unreimbursed costs for testing and contact tracing programs. U.S. Senator Patrick Leahy, whose Vermont home is located on a dirt road just outside of Montpelier, has internet service that doesn't meet the working definition of broadband, and he's been working to provide more flexibility in the pandemic relief package being discussed in Congress now. Well, once you find out what it's like not to live in the first world, even in Vermont, you really want everything to be brought up at least to the 21st century, at least. Vermont has mapped parts of the state where especially rural addresses don't have any internet service, or those that don't meet the connectivity speed minimum definition of broadband. Officials are going to award contracts based on the best balance of expanding the technology and reaching the greatest number of people. Anonymous worker bees at the AP bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. The Navy appeared reluctant to reinstate former Navy SEAL and Missouri Governor Eric Greitens in 2019 until Mike Pence's office, Vice President Mike Pence, appeared to intervene, according to newly released documents. Greitens resigned as governor in 2018 amid several scandals, including campaign misconduct allegations and accusations that he took a compromising photo of a woman without her consent during a 2015 extramarital affair. Yeah, she was just some woman. Navy officials subsequently expressed reservations about Greitens rejoining the military in emails the Kansas City Star obtained. I would be disinclined to grant a major misconduct waiver for anyone with an indictment such as his, based on what we now know, Rear Admiral Brendan McLean, then commander of Navy Recruiting Command, wrote in an email dated January 11th of 2019. McLean's objections were dismissed after the vice president's office appeared to show interest in the matter. Pence's office denied any involvement in Greitens' reinstatement because this guy was a paid lying shill for big tobacco. He's well practiced at lying the big lie. In a summary of a January 30th, 2019 call with Greitens, McLean said the former governor told him Pence had, quote, asked him to come to work for him on a project and suggested he do it in a Navy capacity, end quote. McLean notified Navy leadership the same day that he would begin the reinstatement of Greitens. In a summary of a January 30th, 2019 call with Greitens, McLean said the former governor told him Pence had asked him to come to work for him on a project and suggested he do it in a Navy capacity. McLean notified Navy leadership the same day he would begin the reinstatement of Greitens. Long story short, V. POTUS, this is McLean's executive assistant, whose name was also redacted, wrote on February 14th, wants Greitens to come work for him in D.C., but in a military capacity. The whole chain of command from SecDef on down are supportive of him coming in, so we're just trying to make this as painless and quick as possible. Greitens was a rising Republican star after his 2016 election, a charismatic former Navy SEAL and Rhodes Scholar with presidential ambitions. But in February of 2018, he was indicted on an invasion of privacy charge in St. Louis for taking a compromising photo of a woman with whom he was having an affair. Soon after, a Missouri House committee began investigating campaign finance issues, and Greitens faced a second felony charge in St. Louis, accusing him of providing his political fundraiser with a donor list from a veterans charity that he founded. Bill Stewart of Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. After failing to secure a Senate confirmation hearing, Trump's most divisive nominee for a Pentagon position so far has taken a different, less senior policy role at the Defense Department, a spokeswoman said yesterday, Sunday. Anthony Tata, or is it Tata? A retired Army Brigadier General who has called former President Barack Obama a terrorist leader, will officially perform the duties of the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. In theory, the position would still offer Tata some degree of influence on hot-button Pentagon policy matters, including, potentially, Iran. In addition to falsely claiming Obama a Muslim and a terrorist, Tata has also called Congresswoman Maxine Waters, an African-American, of course, a race-baiting racist, according to his now-deleted Twitter posts that were seen by Reuters. Democratic Congressman Adam Smith, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, blasted the move to give Tata a senior job just days after the Republican-led Senate abruptly canceled Tata's confirmation hearing. If an appointee cannot gain the support of the Senate, as is clearly the case with Tata, then Trump should not put that person into an identical temporary role. This invasion of scrutiny makes our government less accountable and prioritizes loyalty over competence. Which I presume Trump said exactly. Well, we better get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Bees are a big part of the life cycle of plants. carrying pollen from one flower to another and allowing plants to produce their frequently yummy output. But with bee populations on the decline, what could possibly take their place? How about soap bubbles? It may sound fantastical, but Eijiro Miyako and his colleague at the Japan Advanced Institute of Science and Technology have used battery-powered bubble makers to pollinate a pear orchard. The details of their magical realism approach to agriculture are in the journal iScience. A few years back, Miyako and his team tried to mimic the pollinating prowess of honeybees by retrofitting a 2-inch-long toy drone with brushes made of horsehair. They loaded the device with pollen suspended in a sticky gel, but the tiny flyer was tough to control, and its hairy little applicators ended up damaging the delicate floral targets. After spending some time blowing bubbles with his son, Miyako started thinking more seriously about these soapy little marvels. He figured bubbles would be sticky enough to carry and deliver a pollen payload, but soft and flexible, so they shouldn't hurt a blossom when they land and then pop. The researchers chemically optimized their soapy solution to make bubbles that were mechanically stable and actually enhanced the pollination process. Out in the orchard, they aimed their souped-up soap bubbles at row after row of pear trees, and they found their bubble system worked just as well as the more labor-intensive pollination by hand. Pear trees pollinated by bubble ultimately bore fruit, a sweet sign of success. Miyako has also revived the drone program, this time using a larger model equipped with a machine that unleashes a bubble blitz, and has a big advantage over the handheld model
because it's fully autonomously controllable by GPS with a Google Map.
So the drones can make a beeline to where farmers need them. You know, to be. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Occasional aches and pains are an expected part of life, but for many people, pain is a constant companion. Dr. Chad Helmick is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to manage chronic pain. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad, how many people in the U.S. suffer from chronic pain?
In 2016, 50 million adults had chronic pain, which is pain on most or every day in the past 6 months. More interesting, though, is that 20 million people have high-impact chronic pain, which is chronic pain that also limits their work or life activities on most or every day in the past 6 months. This is a problem because chronic pain is associated not only with symptoms, but with anxiety and depression, reduced quality of life, and the risk of opioid problems.
What are the most common causes of chronic pain?
The most common causes generally relate to bones and joints, like low back pain and arthritis, but there are many other causes: headaches, sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, surgery and injuries, and many, many others.
Is chronic pain more common in any particular group of people?
Yes, it occurs at all ages, but it's more common in older middle-aged adults and in the oldest old, 85 and older. It's also more common in women, poor people, and those who live in rural areas.
How is chronic pain treated?
Well, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis, which can help guide treatment. But the thinking about chronic pain now is that it becomes a chronic disease by itself, regardless of the cause, and that can cause significant problems. The real goal in management is to have a manageable level of pain, not to get rid of all pain. There's several steps that can be taken, and these are sometimes difficult to do because of barriers to access. But it makes sense to do the simplest and safest things first. And these are non-drug steps. Things like physical activity. Walking is perfectly good to help reduce pain. Also, self-management education can give you some confidence in managing chronic pain when you're on your own. There's also physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological therapy, better sleep, which usually means less alcohol, and seeing a chiropractor or getting biofeedback and massage. If that's not enough, non-opioid drugs like Tylenol or Motrin and Advil or naproxen or Aleve can help. If those don't work, then it's time to consider something stronger. Sometimes that's opioids, but there's not great evidence that opioids are good for long-term pain in most people.
Do you have any advice for people suffering from chronic pain?
Well, it's important to work with a variety of providers who are working together to help you. The goal, again, is manageable pain so you can live a productive life. This can include physical therapy, most people can walk, to treat any underlying depression or anxiety, and to avoid further injuries. Finally, the National Pain Strategy is laying out a strategic roadmap to improve pain management system in this country.
Where can listeners get more information about managing chronic pain?
Listeners can go to the NIH website, nih.gov, and type in National Pain Strategy.
Thanks, Chad. I've been talking today with Dr. Chad Helmick about ways to manage chronic pain. If you're experiencing daily pain, talk with your healthcare provider to ensure you have the correct diagnosis and know how to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO. This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Colorectal cancer is the number 2 cancer killer of men and women in the United States, but it is preventable. Early on, colorectal cancer typically has no symptoms. It starts with a precancerous polyp or abnormal growth in the colon, which can be removed without surgery. Several tests are available to find these polyps, so they can be removed before they turn into cancer. Screening also finds colorectal cancer early when treatment works best. Recommended screening for adults at average risk begins at age 50 and continues until age 75. Learn about screening test options and find out which tests are covered by insurance. Talk to your healthcare provider about when you should be screened and discuss the best tests for you. For more information about colorectal cancer prevention, please visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Should we fear Donald Trump's trumpeting the idea of postponing November's election? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In a July 31st tweet, Donald Trump, after declaring that the 2020 election would be extraordinarily inaccurate and fraudulent, floated the idea of postponing the election until people can, quote, securely and safely vote, end quote, presumably in person, after the danger from COVID-19 has passed, sometime in the indefinite future, presumably with him remaining in power. The proposal is preposterous and will gain no traction because a president has no constitutional or statutory power to postpone an election or to remain in power after his term ends. None. Zero. But there was a second part and purpose of the tweet, to lambaste voting by mail, which will be used by states more often in 2020. 5 states, prior to COVID-19, used voting by mail exclusively for their elections, including heavily and reliably Republican Utah. What's dangerous here is Trump's attempt to undermine the electoral process and our faith in it. Combine that effort along with his recent refusal to answer Fox News reporter Chris Wallace's question, would he accept the results of the election if he lost? That's scary. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day that became known in California as the Wheatland Riot. The industrial workers of the world, or Wobblies, were trying to organize hop pickers who worked near the city of Wheatland in Northern California. Living conditions for the hop pickers were rough. Durst Ranch was the largest agricultural employer in the state, hiring hundreds of seasonal farm workers each summer. The Durst workers slept in tents. The bathrooms were latrine ditches dug into the ground. The well water they drank was contaminated and foul. The Northern California heat was excruciating, with temperatures soaring above 100 degrees. And while the temperatures were high, the wages were unbearably low. On this fateful day, thousands of workers gathered to hear IWW organizer Richard Ford talk about calling a strike. In response, the local sheriff formed a posse to arrest Ford. During the arrest, one of the posse shot his gun into the air to disperse the crowd. Chaos erupted. Gunfire was exchanged. 4 people lay dead, including the district attorney, a deputy sheriff, a worker, and a young boy. Authorities blamed the IWW for the violence. Ford stood trial for causing the riot, even though he had fired no shots. Another Wobbly organizer, who was not even there that day, was also tried for the events at Wheatland. Both received sentences of life in prison for second-degree murder. Today, an historic marker commemorates the site. It explains that the event, quote, focused public opinion for the first time on the plight of California's agricultural laborers, and resulted in new state legislation to regulate labor camp conditions. A new state commission on immigration and housing was created to improve working conditions. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 60 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting only a high of about 90. Oh, we're going to need a sweater. It was quite hot over the weekend. We will have plenty of sunshine, of course. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Mostly clear overnight with lows in the low to mid 60s. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10. Partly cloudy skies tomorrow with a high in the low 90s. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County of Southern Oregon here is now at 352. We will get the rest of the weekend totals later on in the day, so you'll see somewhat of an increase tomorrow, and they've been increasing terribly. One confirmed case of a death, though that is grossly undercounted, of course. Grass pollen is moderate. The air quality index in the region is good at 26 parts per million. The daytime UV index is very high at 8. We're going to skip right into weather from around the world, and weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 72 and sunny. Paris is 73 and fair. Rome is 86 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 78 and fair. Kabul is 84 and fair. Hong Kong is 77 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 79 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia, 57, partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 56 and sunny. And New York is 84 degrees Fahrenheit, sunny with a heat advisory. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Jeffrey Heller of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Ash Mondays. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu struck back at demonstrations calling for his resignation, accusing protesters of trampling democracy and the Israeli media of encouraging them. Netanyahu, who was sworn in for a fifth term in May after an election, has often complained of press bias against him, and some of the charges he faces in a corruption trial relate to attempts to seek favorable coverage from media barons in return for state favors. Thousands of Israelis have been taking to the streets, including outside Netanyahu's home, to protest against corruption and economic hardship stemming from lockdowns during the coronavirus crisis. Netanyahu, who has the right-wing Likud party, has denied wrongdoing in the three graft cases against him. Criticizing the protests and media at the weekly cabinet meeting, Netanyahu said that while demonstrators portray their campaign as an attempt to preserve Israeli democracy, I see it as an attempt to trample democracy because he's the leader. Dear leader. They do not report the demonstrations. They participate in them, he said of the media. They add fuel. Netanyahu said no one was trying to restrict the demonstrations, in which many of the protesters are young Israelis. Opinion polls have shown his popularity in decline. Netanyahu's main coalition partner, Benny Gantz of the centrist Blue and White Party, defended the demonstrations. The right to protest is the lifeblood of a democracy, Gantz said. Legislator Tamar Zandberg of the opposition left-wing Meretz Party said in a statement that Netanyahu was marching in the footsteps of dark regimes.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Gunmen shot dead a journalist early yesterday Sunday in the Mexican town of Iguala in the southwestern state of Guerrero, local authorities said, in what was at least the fourth murder of a reporter in the country this year. Pablo Maguires of news website PM Noticias had gone to dine in an Iguala restaurant in the company of a police bodyguard when unidentified assailants opened fire on them after midnight. The website also published an announcement about the killing on Facebook, as did the Human Rights Commission of Guerrero, which has long been one of Mexico's most violent states. Maguires, who was killed along with his bodyguard, Guerrero state prosecutor said, had survived a previous assassination attempt in 2016. The motive for shooting was not immediately clear. According to Reporters Without Borders, a non-profit group dedicated to protecting freedom of information, 3 other journalists had been killed in Mexico this year. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we'll meet up tomorrow for Terrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.